Soon to WTTW.
Hi, I'm Raphael, and I watch WTTW.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by a grant from the William F. O'Connor Foundation in memory of Billy O'Connor.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we have to come together. We have to.
COVID vaccines, immigration, and more. President Biden holds his first White House press conference.
We're humans just like anybody else.
How the Albany Park community is supporting Asian American residents amid a rise in anti-Asian rhetoric and violence.
What's next for indoor and outdoor dining restrictions in Chicago?
As Passover and Easter approach, how Chicago's faith communities are preparing to worship during the pandemic.
A college basketball player is calling out inequalities between the NCAA's men's and women's tournaments.
Jeffrey Bayer has all the answers about the history and restoration of a well-known Chicago building in this week's all-new Ask Jeffrey.
We started virtual programming right away, as soon as the pandemic hit.
And how the Cook County Forest Preserves pivoted to virtual programming during the pandemic.
And as you mentioned, I'm live in Albany Park as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. It's a diverse community on the city's northwest side with a sizable Asian American population, some of whom have been sounding the alarm about anti-Asian hate and violence. We also heard from local businesses who said COVID's been a big hit, but that neighbors have stepped up to support them. We'll also have a conversation about a new affordable housing development. But for now, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Nick. And now to some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announces loosened restrictions for outdoor activities like dining, concerts, and exercise classes in Chicago. This despite rising COVID rates. The mayor says the upward trend in COVID, by the way, is, quote, disturbing, with a 23% increase in cases. For that reason, the mayor says she is not expanding indoor capacity limits. We'll have much more on this later in the program. Meanwhile, Illinois public health officials report more than 2,100 new cases in the last 24 hours, with 35 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total nearing 1,230,000 cases since the start of the pandemic and 21,171 deaths. The 7-day test positivity rate in the state is 3.2%. Now that's up 0.5% from yesterday. And Lightfoot is calling for an independent investigation of vaccine distribution at Loretto Hospital in Chicago's Austin neighborhood. This comes the day after the hospital announced the resignation of embattled executive Dr. Anosh Ahmed after a series of Block Club Chicago and WBEZ reports about improper off-site vaccinations. A Loretto employee and the union representing workers at the hospital told WTTW about repeated instances of a so-called VIP list of vaccine recipients on site at the hospital. Lightfoot paused distribution of vaccines to Loretto for any new first doses and says that Rush University Medical Center will receive what would have gone to Loretto. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. After much anticipation, members of the White House press corps had the chance to question President Joe Biden from the White House. He's answered reporters' questions since becoming president, but this was his first official press conference. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the highlights and what it means for Illinois. Amanda.
Brandis, much is often made about a president's first 100 days in office. It's when a president establishes his priorities, sets in place his style. Biden's big goal for his, getting 100 million shots into the arms of Americans within that window, thanks to medical breakthroughs and contracts that, at least in part, were set in motion, by the way, by his predecessor. It's already met that goal, so he's upping it by doubling.
That's right, 200 million shots in 100 days. I know it's ambitious, twice our original goal, but no other country in the world has even come close, not even close to what we are doing. And I believe we can do it.
About 5.1 million doses so far have gone into the arms of Illinoisans, though the governor has indicated he expects the feds are going to be coming through with a lot more of that one-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine by the end of this month. Now, Biden says above anything else, his main focus is the coronavirus.
But the fundamental problem is getting people some peace of mind so they can go to bed at night and not stare at the ceiling wondering whether they lost their health insurance, whether they're going to lose a family member, whether they're going to be in a position where they're going to lose their home because they can't pay their mortgage.
Reporters, however, did not focus on COVID. They grilled him on immigration. The president scoffed when asked whether a surge of unaccompanied minors at the United States southern border was acceptable.
That's a serious question, right? Is it acceptable to me? Come on. That's why we're going to be moving 1,000 of those kids out quickly. That's why I got Fort Bliss opened up. That's why I've been working from the moment this started to happen to try to find additional access for children to be able to safely, not just children, but particularly children, to be able to safely be housed.
Despite all of that grilling, there wasn't one clear takeaway when it comes to immigration. Jackie Stevens heads Northwestern University's Deportation Research Clinic, and she says that Biden's statements were at times contradictory.
On the one hand, it seemed like he was reiterating a policy of deterrence and trying to keep people out of the United States. And, as I mentioned, he's talking about continuing the policy with, Mexico and requiring people to stay there, which would seem to try to placate critics from the right. On the other hand, he did say some really supportive things about the importance of our asylum policy and enforcing it.
Now look for more news from Biden tomorrow. He says that's when he will announce a major infrastructure plan.
So that we can compete and create significant numbers of really good paying jobs.
Another topic the president was pressed on: voting rights. Biden called GOP efforts to restrict voting un-American and sick.
And so I'm convinced that we'll be able to stop this because it is the most pernicious thing. This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I mean, this is gigantic, what they're trying to do.
The president says to that end, he will work to pass a recently approved bill by the Democratic-controlled U.S. House that would require automatic voter registration in all states. Illinois already has that, and just today, Illinois went in the opposite direction, with the legislature passing a bill that makes permanent changes that were put in place for last year's pandemic-era election, things like voting by mail and drop-off ballot boxes.
Voting is the cornerstone of our democracy upon which all of our civil liberties rest. And you look around the country today, and there's states that are trying to limit one's ability to vote. Let's take a look at Georgia, trying to limit drop box access or make it a crime to give food or drinks to those waiting in line to vote. Coming off of COVID, some people still just don't feel comfortable voting, and that's why we should focus on expanding one's ability to vote and the security of that vote.
That measure, as I said, did pass the Illinois General Assembly, though many Republicans voted against it. Speaking of elections, when pressed by reporters, Biden says, yes, he does plan to run for re-election.
That is my expectation.
So is that a yes, that you are running for re-election?
Look, I don't know where you guys come from, man. I've never been able to travel. I'm a great respecter of fate. I've never been able to plan 3.5 years ahead for certain.
Now in Illinois, we've got a big election coming up before the presidential race, and that is next year's statewide contest, including that for governor. Governor J.B. Pritzker recently pouring $35 million into his campaign war chest. But like Biden, Pritzker says he is not focused on campaigning and elections. He says he's focused on the coronavirus. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Albany Park on the city's northwest side is a diverse area with more than 40 languages spoken in its public schools and many residents who were born outside the U.S. In the first half of the 20th century, the neighborhood saw an influx of Jewish residents from other parts of the city. In the 1960s and 70s, the area became home to migrants from Latin America, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg has been reporting in Albany Park as part of our In Your Neighborhood series, and he joins us now. Nick.
Brandis, we're here at Christ Lutheran Church on Wilson Avenue. Our thanks to them for giving us shelter when the skies threatened rain. And yes, as you said, this is an incredibly diverse community. These days, the area's population is about half Latino. There's also a significant Asian American population as well. And some folks have been sounding the alarm about a rise in anti-Asian rhetoric and violence. And we also heard from businesses. Some of them are concerned about the threat of COVID-19, and there's also the threat that COVID-19 poses to residents' health.
Christine Yu owns Bliss Shop at Pulaski and Lawrence. The store sells CBD and hemp products as well as cannabis accessories.
As a cannabis user and as a woman, I always felt like the stores aren't the most female friendly. They don't cater to a lot of ladies.
So she created a business where anyone can feel comfortable walking in and asking questions.
They visit us and they see that our idea, the concept, everything is completely different. It's not what you would picture of a typical smoke shop.
Yu says mail order sales and possibly an increase in CBD and cannabis use driven by the pandemic helped her stay afloat.
I'm really lucky.
Yu grew up on the Northwest Side. She's close with her grandfather, who lives near her business. Amid the rise in anti-Asian rhetoric and violence, she says older folks in particular are on her mind.
I feel like it's been a lot of Asian elderly that have been targeted. There's a lot of caricatures, a lot of stereotypes when it comes to Asian people, and you really need to let that go. We're humans just like anybody else.
Bree Yusun McLuhan is with the Hanul Family Alliance, which serves seniors in Albany Park and around the Chicago area. It's been at work for more than 30 years.
In nutrition, meal delivery, ESL, immigration, and home care, but also just the mental health and just that awareness as well. With the pandemic and seeing that reported 150% rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, I do think it's a moment for us to just take pause and just have that alliance together.
Hanul started as a Korean American senior center, but in a diverse place like Albany Park now serves everyone, and it adapted its services quickly to the COVID era.
That all just kept going, and Hanul just never stopped and is very resiliently rooted.
Asian Youth Services is another long-running organization in the community. Sherry Fenton started the group some 30 years ago after seeing children from refugee and immigrant families who needed help with education. Adapting her after-school program in a small indoor space isn't feasible, so much of Fenton's work now is providing free food to anyone.
There's lots of people, not just the families we deal with, but a lot of people in the neighborhood are hungry. And so we'll give food to anyone who wants it.
While the after-school programs are on hold, they have done some online tutoring, and the group's scholarship program to send students to private schools is alive and well.
Kids getting a good education is really empowering. We're talking about kids whose parents didn't get to go to school for a very long time, and their kids are graduating from college.
Fenton says she's hopeful the end of the pandemic is in sight, so she can have her space once again bustling with kids.
The pretty sprinkle one in the middle.
Andrew Chow of Something Sweet Donuts also feels a sense of hope. Something Sweet is a family business.
Everything's made by my dad, who's the baker, and I sell them. We're known for our red velvet donut. My personal favorite ones are the blueberry, old-fashioned, but anything you pick can't go wrong.
They first opened in 2012 and moved to Albany Park in 2019. When the pandemic hit the following year,
it was definitely scary at first, but we would have people come in just to see how we were doing, or tip way too much. Our family, we feel very grateful that everyone has been coming in to support us.
Chow says this neighborhood has a strong sense of community pride.
Albany Park is definitely a hidden gem in the city.
Bree Yusun McLuhan says she's also seen that sense of community pride and support during the pandemic, and especially in the wake of the mass shootings in Atlanta.
We just want to let everyone in the community know just how thankful we are and for seeing us and standing with us in solidarity.
Hanul Family Alliance is one of dozens of organizations taking part in a rally and vigil for victims of the mass shooting in Atlanta. That's happening tomorrow in nearby Horner Park. It's also being live streamed. We've got details online. We'll have much more on issues important to the neighborhood coming up, including a conversation about a new affordable housing development, and we'll talk with the area's representative in the city council. But for now, Brandis, back to you.
All right, we'll look forward to seeing you then, Nick. Thank you. And now to Phil Ponce for a look at how some are celebrating upcoming religious holidays. Phil.
Brandis, for the second year in a row, Chicago's Jewish and Christian communities are preparing to celebrate Passover and Easter amidst the pandemic. For some, that means coming together with friends and loved ones over Zoom after what's been an isolating 12 months. For others, it will be a mix of online worship and in-person celebration. Here to share more are Rabbi Seth Limmer of Chicago's Sinai Congregation, that's located on Chicago's near north side, and Father Matthew O'Donnell, pastor at St. Columbanus Catholic Church in the Park Manor neighborhood on Chicago's south side. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Rabbi, if I can begin with you, as you prepare for Passover, how are the preparations going this time as opposed to this time last year?
The preparations are a little bit easier because we had more advance notice about being on Zoom. I think also last year, because this was all so new, we felt a tremendous pressure to be creative and offer all sorts of different options. But after this incredibly dislocating year that we've had, the Seders that we're having as a congregation here are going to be very traditional and sort of try and give everybody what they've been missing, the biggest sense of normalcy as possible.
And Father O'Donnell, how about at St. Columbanus? What are your plans for Easter this year as opposed to last?
I think the biggest thing for us at St. Columbanus is that people are actually able to be here in person. So we have capacity restrictions and limitations, but the fact that people can actually gather together for Easter is such a blessing and such a great thing as compared to a year ago.
And Rabbi, to what extent is your congregation able to meet in person?
We've made the decision not to meet in person. The great ritual of Passover is the Seder, the meal at which we tell the story of our liberation from Egypt that obligates us to work for the liberation of the rest of the world. And it happens by dipping foods in other foods and passing around plates. And there's no way to work for a better world if we're all passing around germs like that in an age of pandemic. So we're just going to be online.
And as far as the flexibility, the adaptability on the part of your congregants, Rabbi, how has that gone? Because you have been exclusively Zoom now.
We have been Zoom only for a year, with the exception of life cycle events, which have been small. And I'll give a huge credit to my staff. We put in the time early on the phone with people to help them set up their Zoom. So any stereotypes you have about nonagenarians not being able to learn technology, we help them through. And our community, which spans all generations, has gotten really good at being on Zoom and really good at staying connected and bridging that isolation.
Father O'Donnell, yours is a hybrid congregation, for lack of a better term, because you have had some in-person gathering and also some online. How has that worked?
So all of our liturgies, all of our masses and celebrations here are live streamed. They go to our Facebook page, and then we also upload it later to our YouTube channel and our parish's website. So about half of our congregation is back here in person, and the other half participate virtually each week.
This has been a very lonely year for a lot of people. Father O'Donnell, let me stay with you. How have you, to what extent has that been an issue for people, isolation, loneliness, and how do you address that?
I think isolation and loneliness has definitely been something that a lot of people have felt this year. So we made the decision, we call parishioners each week. I make phone calls. Other parishioners here in the church are calling one another. Social media has been a great way to stay connected. And kind of like Rabbi was saying, we found all of the people across generation have found ways to use technology to really connect with one another.
Rabbi, there have been reports, and it's no surprise that many people have suffered challenges to their mental health. Some folks have experienced depression and so forth as a result of the pandemic. What has been your experience as far as reaching out to people who might be suffering those effects?
I'm glad that those people who are really suffering, and it's all ages, although I will say I have a special place in my heart for kids and for widows and widowers. People are really suffering out there, and one of the roles of a community and a religious congregation needs to be a community. is to be in contact with those people and let them know that someone cares. And we try as much as possible to create loving spaces, large and small, for people to connect and also to be honest and to admit that this has been mentally grueling on all of us. And I don't think any one of us is in perfect mental health. And we need to be able to talk about that and confront that together.
Rabbi, one of the groups you mentioned are young folks, and anecdotally, one does hear of teenagers, for example, who aren't able to go to high school, be with their peers and so forth. How have you specifically addressed younger people who might be suffering the effects of isolation?
You know, we got very lucky because our young high school students were really energized in the spring, and then unfortunately in the wake of Breonna Taylor's death and George Floyd's death. They started a group called Teens Be Heard to raise the voices for people who aren't represented in the electoral process. And our teenagers have bound together to try and make this a better world. They meet every week. They have planning meetings in between. So our teens have actually reached out to each other in religious community, make connections all over Zoom. We went to protests. And so that's been the encouraging sign that we've had. And we get together every week for our religious school and learning, and those that are there, we get some more personal time with. So it's been great to see them take the lead, but that doesn't mean how much they need it.
Father O'Donnell, a lot of institutions have suffered financially. How is it going for your congregation?
So we've been incredibly blessed here. I think people have been very generous throughout this year. The ministries like our food pantry here at St. Columbanus has been able to continue. And I think a big part of that is because people saw that even while we might not have been open or weren't in person when the pandemic first started, our ministries continue. And so I've been really surprised and grateful and really humbled by the fact that people have been so generous. And I know that's true throughout the Archdiocese of Chicago.
And sticking with you, Father O'Donnell, any silver linings for your congregation? Any positive things that have come out of this?
Yeah, I think we've had weddings and baptisms, and our high school seniors who have received full ride scholarships to college, and our community using technology in a way that we had always talked about but never really implemented. And I think really the silver lining is we're a stronger community today because we missed each other, and we've had to find ways and be really intentional about coming together as a faith community.
Rabbi, how about for your congregation? Any good things come out of this?
I would say in the silver linings category, which you need to find, we're a very wide-flung congregation. We have members on the South Shore, on the North Shore, in the western suburbs. And now through the magic of Zoom, people can be with us in a real inclusive way and be seen and feel like they're a part of things. And I know that we're going to continue that. I would say the other thing is we feel like we matter and we're making a difference in a way that's more noticeable than ever before. This is a time where people have had most of their community and social opportunities and rootedness in life taken away from them. And we've tried our best to provide that for people. And I think the numbers that we're seeing and the appreciation that we're getting show that we're sticking true to that mission.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Rabbi Limmer, Father O'Donnell, thank you both so much, and all the best to both of you and your congregations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, we check back in on Albany Park as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series, so please stay with us.
And now we return to Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg, who is reporting from Albany Park on the city's northwest side as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Nick.
Thanks, Paris. I'm joined by Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez-Sanchez of the 33rd Ward, which includes parts of Albany Park. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. We appreciate it. When we spoke with you last April at the beginning of this pandemic, you were really concerned about folks losing their jobs and potentially losing their homes. There is still an eviction moratorium in place, but are you concerned that there's potentially an eviction crisis looming when that should be lifted?
We are very concerned, and we are pleased to see that there is movement at the state level to make sure that there is rent relief that is coming and for small landlords. But yes, we are concerned, and people are concerned. People have been contacting our offices trying to figure out how they can find help, particularly with undocumented people in our ward that don't really have a lot of access to resources.
Yeah, particularly with undocumented folks, are there concerns that, you know, the state is setting aside hopefully stimulus money for rental assistance? You know, how are you going to ensure that those folks have access to those resources?
So because the city of Chicago has established that city monies can go, we can definitely use resources. When we establish programs, we're going to have to look into what are the buckets that we're gonna use. But the fact that we are talking at the state level about rent relief is a really huge step. I'm really pleased about that.
There's also been obviously a lot of fear from businesses about being able to stay open. You're backing a measure that would let restaurants and bars get their liquor license fees reimbursed if they weren't able to open up. How do you see businesses faring in your ward?
So in our ward, we are really lucky, I would say, that people definitely visit the restaurants. We're a very diverse neighborhood. We have restaurants that serve food from everywhere. We're a very walkable neighborhood, and people support their businesses here. So we have been lucky that we haven't lost a lot of businesses. We are actually welcoming new businesses in the ward, which I'm very happy about, and I'm really hoping that we're going to continue to see those businesses thriving now in the summer, that people are going to be able to be outside more.
Yeah, the summer months hopefully bringing better things. Also, you know, hopefully more and more vaccines. There have been these reports in recent weeks of a couple of vaccine providers getting their doses cut off, you know, vaccinating people who really weren't eligible. Do you have any concerns about folks in your ward being able to get access to those shots?
So we have been lucky that we have Swedish Covenant Hospital very close to our ward, as well as other small clinics that have been vaccinated their patients. So right here in our ward, we have around an 11% to 14% of people that have been vaccinated. We still have a lot of work to do around it, and there's a lot of education that we have to do, but I think that we are en route to be able to accomplish that.
We've got about a minute left, but you spoke in City Council this week in support of the Puerto Rican Self-Determination Act, which is supposed to be going forth in Congress. It would let the island decide if it's going to be a territory, a state, or something else entirely, and you said your personal experience shaped your opinion on that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. So this is an effort to decolonize Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States and has been for 123 years. I grew up in a neighborhood that didn't have running water in Puerto Rico because our water was being diverted to a Navy base that was in Ceiba, a U.S. Navy base. Puerto Rico has had to experience colonialism in a very hard way, and I think that it is time for the people of Puerto Rico to be able to determine what is the relationship that they want to have with the United States, and this measure will help accomplish that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alderwoman Rodriguez-Sanchez, for spending part of your evening with us. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
All right. Obviously, a very emotional issue for Chicago's Puerto Rican community. Nick, thank you. We'll be checking in with you in just a bit. And there's still more Chicago Tonight to come as we approach warmer months. Chicago officials ease restrictions on outdoor activities. We have a rundown of the changes. The NCAA was forced to take action after viral social media posts showed unequal treatment of women's teams compared to men's teams. Plans for a 6-story affordable housing development in Albany Park head to City Council next month. We talk with a community leader about that and gentrification concerns. Jeffrey Bayer quizzes us on our knowledge of a Chicago landmark that's being partially restored in this week's Ask Jeffrey.
Or a bouncing or a trill call like a...
And how the Cook County Forest Preserve is live streaming educational programs like 2 Owls and a Naturalist during the pandemic. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Department reports an officer has been shot in the department's 9th district on the southwest side. Police Superintendent David Brown says the incident happened outside a Home Depot and the officer was shot in the shoulder. His injury is said to be non-life-threatening. The officer was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, and this is the 4th officer shot in Chicago in the last 2 weeks. Now, CPD says the suspect was shot in an exchange of gunfire and pronounced dead at the hospital. Some sports news tonight. First, the Bulls net an all-star center in a blockbuster trade with the Orlando Magic today. Nikola Vucevic, as well as center Al-Farouq Aminu, come to the Bulls in exchange for Otto Porter, Wendell Carter Jr., and 2 first-round draft picks. Vucevic averages more than 24 points and nearly 12 rebounds. And as you can see here, he can knock it in from the three-point range. But not so happy news for Sox fans tonight. Rising star outfielder Eloy Jimenez will miss 5 to 6 months because of a ruptured pectoral tendon. Jimenez sustained the injury today running into the wall, trying to make a play during an exhibition game. There you see that fateful moment. The injury could cost Jimenez the entire season, but General Manager Rick Hahn says the team will have a better idea when he starts rehab. And now, Brandis, we go back to you for a look at restrictions that some local businesses are facing.
Paris, Chicago won't allow businesses to expand indoor capacity due to a, quote, alarming increase in COVID-19 cases, but they will be allowed to serve more customers outside. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now to break down the new mitigations. Heather, so what are the new restrictions?
Well, the city had hoped this week to allow indoor businesses to expand their capacity, like bars and restaurants. But that alarming increase that you mentioned in the number of COVID cases and an increase in visits to emergency rooms with COVID-like symptoms means that that just wasn't possible. So instead, the city allowed businesses to expand their outdoor operations, including parties of up to 10 people per table at restaurants, as well as increasing the size of outdoor social events like weddings to no more than 100 people, as well as the size of fitness classes can expand. So there's a little bit of relief in store for businesses who've moved their operations outdoors.
And why the change? Why the increase to allow more outside?
Well, I asked Mayor Lightfoot whether she was concerned that that sent a mixed message to Chicagoans, saying on one hand, wear your mask, keep social distancing. COVID is still here, it's still real, and it's on the rise, but go ahead and gather at restaurants outdoors. And she said she wasn't worried about that, but that she wanted to help businesses, which she said, quote, had been barely on life support, end quote, since the beginning of the pandemic, earn a little bit more money and get a little bit more firm financial footing. But it's a real tight line that she's going to have to walk. And she said that she may have to turn back the dial even further if the cases don't start coming down soon.
Yeah, I'm sure they're keeping an eye on those cases. Heather Sharon, always on the case for us. Thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. College basketball's most important competitions, the NCAA tournaments, are in full swing. But an athlete's viral tweet is shining light on the inequalities between weight room facilities for the men's teams competing in Indianapolis and the women's teams competing in San Antonio. Oregon player Sedona Price sent this tweet out last week.
I got something to show y'all. So for the NCAA March Madness, the biggest tournament in college basketball for women, this is our weight room. Let me show y'all the men's weight room.
Now, after Prince's tweet, I said Price earlier, after Prince's tweet garnered media attention, the NCAA apologized and upgraded the women's facilities, but others have also claimed inequities in food, gift bags, and even COVID testing between the men's and women's tournaments. Joining us to delve deeper into the gender gap in sports is Julie DeCaro, senior writer and editor for Deadspin and author of the new book, Sidelined: Sports, Culture, and Being a Woman in America. Julie, good to see you again. We're going to get to that book in a bit as well. But I wanted to know, what is your reaction to this athlete's viral tweet?
Well, I think, Brandis, it's, all part of the same thing. Women, whether it's in the broadcast side, whether it's in beat reporting, whether it's women athletes, are just sort of habitually treated like we don't belong in this space. We're not welcome in this space. And, it's kind of amazing after what happened with the Wubble, with the WNBA. Women were staying in hotels with similarly bad conditions, with terrible food. They had bed bug traps under their mattresses. And you would think that after something like that happens, the NCAA would say, okay, let's make sure this doesn't happen this time. But there's, they never cease to amaze me with how tone deaf and how inconsiderate they can be of women athletes.
Now, the NCAA, they did react quickly. They apologized and upgraded the weight room, but was that enough?
I mean, it's not enough because that's not the only problem, right? I mean, first of all, the women are playing in Texas where there's not a mask mandate. So there's been a lot of questions about how safe these women actually are. They're getting reportedly inferior COVID tests than the men are getting. There are no photographers or not enough photographers covering the women's games. So if you go to a photo service and try to get pictures of the women's games, there are far fewer than there are for the men. There's the food issue. There's the equality of the weight room issue. I mean, it's just sort of things across the board. And it's great that they fixed the weight room issue, which I think, by the way, they did because a couple of retailers stepped up, like Dick's, to support and to send equipment to the women. But this kind of thing shouldn't be happening when the NCAA is involved in 2021.
So you mentioned these other discrepancies, of course. There's been a post that showed the lackluster women's meal compared to these full buffets for the men. Discrepancies between the COVID testing, the men and women are getting different tests, and the tournament has chalked that up to, taking advice from different health officials. Should these discrepancies be happening in the first place? What does all this say to you?
No, of course they shouldn't be happening. I mean, they moved the men's entire tournament to Indianapolis and to towns within 2 hours of either side of Indianapolis because they said they wanted the men to be safe. But, like I said, the women are sent to Texas where there's no mask mandate and which has all along through the COVID pandemic been one of the worst states in terms of positivity rate. We are, I don't know at this point, almost 50 years after the advent of Title IX. No, I mean, this stuff should not be happening. And it's amazing to me that someone didn't sit down with whoever was in charge of the men's tournament and say, okay, what are we doing? Let's make sure that there's equality across the board here. These are, Class A athletes in every sense of the word. And, it's just amazing, again, that in, this day and age that we're still seeing this kind of stuff when it comes to women's sports.
And initially, the NCAA argued, there has been the argument that the men's tournament makes so much more revenue than the women's tournament. And that is the reason for the difference in amenities, right down to, the towels and the gift bags. What's your reaction to that argument?
Well, first of all, I mean, all right, so if we want to talk about the men's game bringing in more money, let's spend the next 25 to 30 years dumping as much marketing and resources and money into the women's game, and then we'll check back and we'll see which game brings in more money. And, it's all part of a bigger picture, Brandis. If you don't market the game, if you don't tell the women's stories, if people don't know, because nothing is covered, what the beef is between this team and that team, or what's going on with this player and she's recovered from a severe injury, or this is her final, she's a senior and this is her last chance to win. If you don't tell those stories that we all know about the players in the men's game, then people aren't interested. And so it's all part of the bigger picture of outlets not wanting to cover women's sports because they perceive there being no audience, and there being no audience because the women are never covered. And by the way, there is a growing audience for women's sports, but they're not being an audience because people feel like they don't know anything about the people who are watching on the court. Watching anything when you don't know the stories of the players isn't all that much fun. It's basically just X's and O's. It's really those stories of people that make sports interesting for most of us.
And as you were speaking, Julie, we were looking at video of the women playing. And there's also been a lot of talk about even the March Madness term being emblazoned on the court for the men, but it is not, and we could see it in that video, it is not on the court for the women. But before we get out of here, we still have a little bit of time. Your new book just out this month, Sidelined: Sports Culture and Being a Woman in America. Why did you want to write this book, and what do you want people to take away from it?
There's a lot of things that women who are working in sports media feel they can't say. Because you get labeled as being difficult, because it affects your employer, it affects your relationships with your colleagues, it affects things across the board. And you get a lot of blowback and a lot of harassment for it. There's things that I feel like I can't say on Twitter, I can't say in social media, because I just don't have the bandwidth to deal with the response that I'm going to get. But putting it into a book felt more substantial than screaming into the void on social media, which is what I feel like I do most of the time. And what I'd like people to take away from it is that, it's not a sports book. It's a book that uses sports as an entree into the way that women are being treated across America, whether it's equal pay rights or whether it's violence against women or women hitting a glass ceiling in their jobs or things like crying at work. These are things that affect women not only nationally, but internationally. And sports is just sort of the entree that I use to talk about the topics.
Okay. Good to have you on the show. Again, the name of the book is Julie DeCaro's new book, Sidelined: Sports Culture and Being a Woman in America. My thanks to Julie DeCaro for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And now we check back in with Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg, who spent the day reporting in Albany Park on the northwest side as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Right now, he is at the Christ Lutheran Church on Wilson Avenue. Nick.
That's right, Brandis, and I'm joined by Diane Lemus from Communities United. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Albany Park has long been home to especially lower and middle income folks who rely on the affordable housing in the area, or affordable home prices and rents. How have you seen that supply of affordable housing kind of dwindle over the years?
Yeah, so our organization, Communities United, is a boots on the ground organization. And as we were talking to tenants in our rental housing buildings, we noticed that cash investors were coming in and purchasing our 2 to 4 flat properties and deconverting them into single-family mansion-type multi-million-dollar homes, right? So when our leaders that brought that to CU's attention, we said we need to call an emergency meeting on this. So we had a meeting, we identified the problem, and we worked to find a solution. And that's how Roots came about, and Roots stands for Renters Organizing Ourselves to Stay. And Roots is an anti-displacement tool and a preservation of affordable housing, specifically in our 2 to 4 flat housing stock all over. We want to use Roots all over Chicago neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the prongs that you're working on, the 2 to 4 flats. There's also a new large-scale affordable housing development going in on Lawrence Avenue. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'll start at the beginning with Roots. We interviewed several mission-minded developers, and we chose Chicago Metropolitan Housing Development Corporation as our first Roots developer. And we partnered with other stakeholders like Enterprise Community Partners. The Cook County Land Bank was involved, and we found out through data that Fannie Mae owned most of the 2 to 4 flat properties in Albany Park. So we worked with Fannie Mae to purchase these properties, our developer did, and we needed help from even our congressional elected officials. Congresswoman Schakowsky was instrumental in pushing Fannie Mae to reduce their properties to a price where CMHDC could purchase them, rehab them, and keep them as affordable. So now we're working with our second Roots developer, Celadon Holdings. And Celadon Holdings, through our Roots initiative in partnership, is bringing back new construction of affordable units into Albany Park. It's going to be a 50-unit development, all affordable. And not only that, on the commercial floor, we will see a daycare learning center, and anyone that lives in the building that utilizes that daycare, they aren't charged anything. So, and Part B of that Celadon Roots initiative is we're in the process of purchasing 7 buildings here in Albany Park. Celadon is going to rehab them and keep them all as affordable. 225 additional units will be coming back into Albany Park as affordable. So not only are we creating new construction, we are preserving affordable housing as well. And it shows that when our community gets involved and they're part of the solution, that things can happen. Because it was through our Roots, our Roots initiative that got the neighborhood together and, identified the problem, and we got the solution, right?
All right, Diane Lemus, Communities United. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Now we go back to you in the studio.
Nick, thank you. Up next, a Chicago landmark that's being partially restored in an all-new Ask Jeffrey. But first, a look at the weather.
A piece.
Charles.
A piece of Civil War history is being restored in one of Chicago's most well-known public buildings. But what was it doing there in the first place? Our own Jeffrey Bayer has the answer in this week's Ask Jeffrey, or does he? Hey, Jeffrey, how's it going?
Great, Paris. How are you?
There was some mysteriousness there with the way I asked that question. All right, our letter is from Elizabeth Neal from Elmhurst. She says, I heard that the GAR section of the Chicago Cultural Center is being restored. What's the story of why the GAR had claim to space in the building in the first place?
Okay, well, you know, I thought we'd start off a little differently this week, Paris. I'm going to ask you a quiz question
I knew something
on
was
this
up.
subject. Yes, this is up, and I'm going to make it a little easier for you because we're going to give you a multiple choices here. And actually, your lead-in kind of gave away the answer, but let's see what we've got here. So, what does GAR stand for? Does it stand for Gentleman Authors Room? B, Grand Army of the Republic, C, Garfield, Adams, and Roosevelt, or D, the General Archive and Repository?
Well, since we mentioned the Civil War in the lead and you said that kind of gave it away, I'm going to have to go with Grand Army of the Republic.
Ding, ding, ding. You are correct. It stands for Grand Army of the Republic. So the GAR was essentially a fraternal organization and social club for veterans of the Civil War on the Union side. It was established. There were hundreds of chapters actually established across the country in the second half of the 19th century. The group had regular meetings and even held parades. I love this picture. Look at the guy hanging off the roof there, commemorating their time in the service. In some ways, it was kind of like a proto-VFW. The GAR also had an annual nationwide meeting known as the National Encampment, and in 1900 it was held right here in Chicago. And you'll notice in the top left corner of this poster, a building that might look familiar to you, labeled Memorial Hall GAR. Do you know what that building is?
Well, Jeffrey, since we mentioned in the letter the Cultural Center, I'm going to say that's the Chicago Cultural Center, which I think was the first Chicago Public Library, but you might correct me on that.
You know your history. That's right. It is what we now call the Cultural Center, located prominently on Michigan Avenue across from Millennium Park, but it was originally the Chicago Public Library.
All right, so how did the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, manage to score space at the library?
Right. Well, actually, we might ask, how did the library manage to score space in the GAR Hall? Because in the late 1800s, when the city was looking for a site to build a central library, they decided on what seemed at the time to be the perfect location on Michigan Avenue, but there was a catch. Portions of the land were owned by, you guessed it, the GAR, which hoped to use it as a Civil War memorial. The land had been given to Civil War veterans groups by the state of Illinois legislature. So the city got a compromise, and parts of the northern section of the building became the GAR's Chicago headquarters, where they held meetings and also hosted an exhibition of Civil War memorabilia in glass cases. Today, the space is used for all kinds of private functions and public events, including the Chicago Architecture Biennial, seen here in 2019. And as our questioner mentions, the GAR rooms are undergoing an extensive restoration project. This includes refurbishing the dome, this beautiful dome outside the GAR Memorial Hall and kind of the rotunda there, designed by the building's architect, Charles Coolidge, along with Louis Comfort Tiffany, and fabricated by the renowned local art glass company, Healy and Millay. And this is, by the way, not to be confused with the more famous Tiffany glass dome in that same building at the southern end, which was magnificently restored a few years ago. The project is also restoring many of the more than century-old surfaces and walls in the GAR Memorial Hall, ornamented with symbols of war from throughout history.
I'm looking forward to getting back to the Cultural Center once we can go back there. So, Jeffrey, something's up here. Why did you start the segment by asking me a question?
Oh, well, I guess I'm just in the habit lately because I will be hosting, drumroll please, our new WTTW series, The Great Chicago Quiz Show. The debut episode is tomorrow night, Friday night at 8 p.m. on WTTW. We recruited a wonderful array of contestants who appeared via Skype from all over the Chicago area. Some of them you might know, some of them you will know pretty soon. And we're going to take a look at a quick preview right now, and you might recognize the famous rapper Lupe Fiasco and sports radio host Lawrence Holmes from 670 The Score.
We're going to go into our last question. Chicago's annual Bud Billiken Day features the largest African-American parade in the nation, according to its organizers.
Ooh, fun fact.
Yeah.
His face, when it was much younger, marched in the Bud Billiken parade. If you want to incorporate that into a future question.
I'll incorporate it in this question. Chicago's annual Bud Billiken Day parade, which featured Lupe Fiasco as a young man. The question is, who was Bud Billiken? A, Chicago's first African-American alderman. B, a Southside car dealer who first sponsored the parade in 1929. C, a fictional character who appeared regularly in the Chicago Defender newspaper, fictional. Or D, an all-star shortstop who played for the Chicago American Giants in the Negro Leagues. Who was Bud Billiken?
Wait a second, you're going to leave us hanging like that?
Well, do you know the answer, Paris?
Boy, this is a tough one. I'll go with. It's A or D. I should know this. I'll go with A.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm not going to tell you either way, because you have to tune in tomorrow night at 8 p.m. on WTTW to get the answer to that and all the rest of our questions on the first episode of the Great Chicago Quiz Show, or log into WTTW.com/quiz.
I will watch tomorrow to get the answer. God, I hope I'm right on that. All right, thank you, Jeffrey. And don't forget that you can visit our website for more details about the history of the GAR. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Bayer. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. And we're back with more right after this.
Ask Jeffrey is brought to you in part by BMO Harris Bank.
Wow, you ready?
Yeah, let me just grab my wallet.
Uh-oh, I've seen this before. Wallet way too big, skinny jeans too skinny.
I'll just carry it.
Before you break something, you should know you don't actually need a wallet. With BMO Harris, you can just take cash out with your phone. Or if you need to, you can pay them with Zelle. That works? Yeah. You're stuck, aren't you? Smile. Woo! Those jeans are way too tight.
That feeling you get when no wallet is no big deal. That's the BMO effect.
Animals that wouldn't be able to survive on their own in the wild are getting the care they need and being used to educate the public at 5 forest preserve nature centers around Cook County. But during COVID-19, people aren't allowed to go inside these centers, so the animals and their caretakers reach out virtually. A few weeks ago, Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia traveled north of the city to River Trail Nature Center to learn more. Here's another look.
Eastern screech owls are a common owl. This is full size. He doesn't get any bigger than this. He looks like a baby, but this is it.
Cook County Forest Preserve's naturalist Ryan DePaul is showing off 2 birds of prey today. An eastern screech owl, one of the smallest owls found in the region, and one of the largest, a great horned owl.
We are able to work with these birds because they have an injury where they can't survive in the wild on their own. These birds come to the nature center where hopefully we can give them a good home, a good quality of life.
DePaul says this great horned owl's broken wing healed in a way that keeps it from flying. This eastern screech owl injured its eye, making hunting and survival in the wild nearly impossible.
As I am talking and introducing the birds that you're going to see today, please feel free to share any comments or any questions that you have.
Normally, DePaul would bring these owls to schools or libraries for educational purposes. But in the COVID-19 era, programming like Two Owls and a Naturalist is live-streamed from the River Trail Nature Center in Northbrook, one of 6 forest preserve nature centers in Cook County.
This is our visitor center, so people would come in, see the live animals on display, talk with the naturalists.
Forest Preserve's program manager Nina Bakke says the district pivoted to virtual programming as soon as the county shut down in March.
Two Owls and a Naturalist is focused on the owls here in Cook County. They're amazing adaptations. It's a fun way to engage people. Who doesn't like to see a live animal? But our other programs consist of, history programs, art programs, fitness programs. We try to keep it varied so we can attract as many people as possible.
Now, although the indoor spaces of the Forest Preserve's 6 nature centers have been closed due to COVID-19, these centers still offer free activities, events, and programs, like free snowshoe rentals, which come in handy during this heavy snow.
They're carnivores, so they require that meat. So that's what we're giving to them basically every day. Yeah.
Today, naturalist Jerry Ateri says quail is on the menu. And if logging on to a live stream or snowshoeing don't cut it for you, visitors can check out birds of prey and a coyote in the outdoor enclosures of nature centers.
So this guy has been with us, I think, going on about 8 years now. In the wild, a large bird of prey like this might live 12 or 15 years. In captivity, hopefully, he lives to be as many as 30 years, which,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
While COVID has altered educational programming, the county kept forest preserve trails open throughout the pandemic.
There's so many indoor activities that we're prohibited from now. It's great to have an opportunity to be out in the outdoors. And throughout this pandemic, we have not closed the preserves. And that's an opportunity for people to get exercise and sunlight and be in nature, and that's good physically and spiritually.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
Considerable more amount of snow when that story was shot. And while the Forest Preserve still offers virtual programming like Two Owls and a Naturalist, the district is slowly phasing in more in-person programs like guided walks and camping tutorials. Forest Preserve nature centers remain closed indoors, and for a full list of all 6 of them, visit our website. And that is our show for this Thursday night.
Please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Weekend Review.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.
This evening's presentation of Chicago